Well, hello, everybody. This is the Progress Report for this Wednesday, January 10th, 2018. Last week I said 1918. I'm really into World War I, I guess. And
how's it going, Woodrow?
And we're glad to be back with you folks.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes, it's still within the time frame to say Happy New Year. I think it lasts for the month of January. And maybe a little longer for somebody who haven't
Well, then
seen
Chinese
in a long
New
time.
Year comes up. You can keep doing it. You can,
12 days of
it's
Christmas.
okay.
34 days of New Year.
It's still, they haven't outlawed that yet.
We have, I think, a really fine guest on our show. Kurt Smith, who's the board chairman of Peace Action New Hampshire, is with us and will be joining us. But, you know, we have a new tradition on the Progress Report. It's not all that new anymore. It's the inspiration of my good friend and colleague, Mike Farley. It's called the POTUS Report on the Progress Report. And as I like to say, and I put this up on our Facebook page, it's a target-rich environment. Use a military metaphor. So, Mike,
well, I
here it is.
I do have one. I'm going to focus in on something, a very small piece of what was in the news over the past several weeks. And oh boy, there's been a lot in the news. A lot. It was really a target-rich environment. But I want to focus on a particular tweet that was issued in response to the publication of the book Fire and Fury.
Yeah.
And the particular, there have been a lot of responsive tweets to that. The particular tweet that I want to just focus in on just for a minute, I'm sure everybody's heard it, is the one which included the lines, "I am a stable genius."
Which I guess is better than being an unstable genius.
Yeah, I suppose. But the thing I want to focus in on, a lot of it's been very highly reported, and I don't really want to pile on. That's not my purpose here tonight. It's been reported, you know, almost laughingly, almost as a joke, and I guess I can understand that. But I want to focus in on the fact that its existence reflects that Donald Trump believes that he is a stable genius. And I think that's something that really, you know, we've overlooked because the tweet itself is just so beyond what we're accustomed to seeing from somebody.
Or could it be that he is so insecure he has to say this thing to try and convince himself that he's really not sure?
You're stepping on my headline.
Oh,
it could be that. It could be that. I thought it could only be, and again, maybe I'm giving him more credit. I apparently gave him more credit.
Step on your line,
but that's okay. That's okay. I did want to focus in on that though, because I really think amid all the Sturm und Drang that has happened over the past couple of weeks about this, you know, the firing of Bannon and the look inside the White House and everything that's been going on, amid the real world stuff that's been going on, that particular tweet really stood out to me, and to me it feels like some sort of evidence to the contrary, I guess, and I'll leave the report.
There's where I stepped on your line. Okay, do we have a caller?
Already we have a caller. Well, no caller.
Okay. Well, we hope we have callers. As you all know, I hope we welcome callers. We do indeed think they make the show much better when people call in, and we hope you will. 640-3091 is the number, as it has been for quite a long time, and we urge you to participate in that fashion.
Speaking of quite a long time, we're going into our 9th year here.
Oh, my God.
Just because we always forget, and we ask each other somewhere around June, so I just wanted to set the benchmark.
Imagine that. No, we're going to have a big party when it gets to be the 10th if we're still hanging in here. Yeah, we started out with a tape show, half hour, it was right?
Yeah.
Down on Commercial Street where they had that nice studio down there
the
in
river,
the
big
river
community
building.
center they had going on there.
And there was a different operation up here, and then, you know, it morphed into what we got today. And
I'm going to remind you that I was not in front of the camera originally. That wasn't the original idea. No, your co-host was Patrick Arnold in the original show.
No,
yes, it was.
No kidding.
No kidding. No kidding, boy.
I almost used a 4-letter word I'm not supposed to use. And I want to thank you for these years of being my partner in this. It's been just glorious fun. And I want to thank Brian, your son, for being our director for almost all the shows we do together, which is a wonderful, wonderful contribution. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the rather huge votes in the House yesterday, because, of course, I was there. I'm the ranking member of one of the committees that had some very big bills up. But, if probably everybody's seen this in the Union Leader, which the coverage was kind of meager, but it was there if you went to look for it. Some huge votes in the House of Representatives yesterday. And damn close. And I wanted to just list a few of them in case people want to use this as a vehicle to call in and ask or give us an opinion on them. I just want to mention 4 real quickly. Number 1 is conversion therapy. And
which is, define it. So
that's pray away the gay. If you're gay, you can go to a practitioner, usually a pastoral person of some sort, and get counseling. In some places, they use much rougher methods. They deny that's the case in New Hampshire, the people that got up to defend this practice. But to me, it's just unbelievable that we allow this to go forward for minors. This was about minors. I guess if you're an adult and you want to, go and pray for your conversion to traditional heterosexual orientation, what the heck, if you want to do that. But for minors, and, we had a vote on one of our bills that came up early in the morning, and the vote was 173 to 171. I said, that's going to be the closest vote of the day. One vote, and it would have been a speaker voting to break the tie, because the speaker only votes to break a tie. And by God, the conversion therapy bill was an absolutely dead even vote. And the speaker, who knows what he really believed, but he felt he had to support the majority of the committee, which voted very narrowly on this. Conversion therapy, the outlawing of conversion therapy did not happen. It's still available to be used on minors. I don't know. I just, and you two too, Mike, we think, let's just accept people for who they are. We know a lot more about sexuality than we used to. We know it's not so binary as we used to thought. There's a whole range of sexual orientations, and I've been teaching this course at church about this, and I've learned some stuff, but that's one thing I've certainly learned. Sexuality is a complex, multifaceted thing. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, for the first time, the House voted fairly narrowly, but not, 1 or 2 votes, I guess half a dozen votes, to actually legalize the recreational use of marijuana in New Hampshire. Now,
with limits.
With some limits, and this bill has got a ways to go. Some time ago, we had a bill to decriminalize pot, and I supported that. By the way, I remember, I've practiced law here in this state for a long, long time. Started in I passed the bar in 1964, started practicing in 1968. And in those days, there was a law that made it a crime to be knowingly in the presence of marijuana. Can you believe that?
I can believe it.
It was because it's true.
I was alive in '68. I remember reading about that.
And I remember traveling
and there would actually
traveling around to our district courts all over the state, which is something I really enjoyed doing because I love traveling around the state. And the issue would be, did this person, he or she, know that it was marijuana? And I remember one memorable case when we got up there, and the poor person from the state lab had to test this stuff to affirm it was. And they got her on the stand, and I was ready to do a devastating cross-examination about, And I said, well, what did your test result? She said it was catnip. Case dismissed. But that really did happen. There was a time when it was knowingly, we've gone a long way from there. But I'm going to tell you, folks, and you want to call in and challenge me, you can. I did not vote to support the legalization of marijuana. I just don't. I can talk about it. Callers want to call in. You can berate me. You can engage me. I'm happy to do it. But that's number 2 in my list if you want to participate in that. Interesting. Eventually you'll tell me, Mike, how you would have voted on that.
But don't have to wait. I would have not voted the same way as you.
Okay. We do have occasional differences here. Anyway, that's just me, and I've had lots of interesting debates within my own family about this. Number 3 of the big bills that we dealt with yesterday was the establishment of a medical pay leave program to be funded through voluntary contributions.
Big step for New Hampshire.
Big step. Of course, we couldn't expend any public funds or require any employer contributions to accomplish this result. It has to be through a program of employee participation. But it's a step in the right direction. And we had lots of people get up and testify, oh, this is terrible. This is just, going to be very bad for employers. One is our good friend Keith Murphy, the owner of Murphy's and then the restaurant down in Bedford. I can't afford this.
It really there's a heartless line you got to cross to get up and speak out against that.
Yeah,
that's really something. And I'm speaking from experience. I went through a real rough period of time when my dad was in his last illness. You remember it. It was time consuming. It was important, and good. I'm glad I was able to do it, but a program such as that would certainly have been very, very helpful, and it wouldn't have made it a burden. It was a burden. There are other costs, involved with this kind of thing, and not everybody has the luxury of owning their own business and being able to attend to those kinds of things on their own. So I'm very happy that
this is another example of where we are out of step with every other advanced, industrialized nation in the world on this, as we are on healthcare. And the last one I just wanted to quickly mention was some of our really important energy bills out of the committee in which I'm the ranking member, Science, Technology, and Energy. We had 3 bills where the majority had defeated our people on 11 to 10 votes. On 2 of those bills, we overcame the majority report. And that was very satisfying. These are bills that would essentially save our RGGI program, our regional greenhouse gas program that funds energy efficiency projects that help so many of our citizens, but is not sufficiently funded to help all those that want the help. And the bill to kind of end any using any of the RGGI proceeds for energy efficiency or anything else at all. And the other one, which came up first, was a bill to have the legislature set part of your electric bill. Yeah, like we're going to be the PUC and set your electric bill. And that went down by 2 votes.
Are you really?
2 votes. And that was early. I said, this will be the closest vote of the day.
You thought that would be a close? I would think that would be an absolutely abhorrent bill. Why on earth would we have the legislature involved in setting utility rates?
Just unbelievable.
I'm trying to figure out where's the upside of that.
Yeah, I know. And, we came within 2 votes. But
I didn't follow that bill.
The Republicans, unlike the Democrats, they whip their people hard. They really do. Our leader, our fine friend Steve Shurtleff, he doesn't whip us at all. He says over and again, vote your conscience, vote your district, and I'm fine with that. And we don't get whipped, but the Republicans whip their people hard, and the leadership whipped them on this. And but this
not literally, Bob. It's a figure. It's a political figure.
It's a figure of speech. But I think it still hurts, even though it's just figurative. But this bill will face tough sledding in the Senate, I can tell you that. But
as will the marijuana legalization bill.
I think so, yeah. So we've taken up much too much time talking about this when we have a fine guest waiting to introduce himself, and we don't have too long before our first break. But Kurt, please do introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you've done with your career and your activities and your participation in New Hampshire Peace Action.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm a local resident. I live right here in the city of Manchester and have since I moved here in 2004. I moved here to follow a job as Vice President for Academic Affairs of Southern New Hampshire University, which has gone through God knows what kind of expansion since I left.
Is there any part of the city they're not in now?
I can walk around the campus and not even know where I am anymore. Yeah. So that seems like ancient history because I retired 10 years ago. But I guess for purposes of this discussion, it seems like I've been a peacenik all of my life, particularly during the Vietnam War. I was assistant professor of English at the University of Albany then. Got involved in the student protest movement, and there was a time when the only thing moving on the campus was police helicopters. It seemed like the revolution had come. It seemed like the world would never be the same. It eventually calmed down. I eventually, in effect, lost my job over that. I got denied tenure. And certainly indirectly it was because I was much more interested in doing peace demonstrations than I was in teaching English or doing research. And after that, I became an academic nomad and eventually an academic administrator at the University of Houston, Clear Lake for a long time. I was in Pennsylvania for a while, in Ohio for a while. Eventually ended up here. You'll ask me why I was for peace, why I was against the Vietnam War. It just seemed to fall from the sky in my case. My two brothers are quite conservative, actually. They're conservative Episcopalians. I don't know why I turned out to be the liberal one, but I did. And it just, it comes naturally to me. I think it's because I not only think outside the box, I don't even know sometimes where the box is. It doesn't impress me to know what I'm supposed to think. I just seem to be inherently an independent thinker. That's a start. You'll probably have a follow-up question.
I will, but Brian is telling us it's time for our first break, and we'll take that break, and we'll be back in just a few seconds. Folks, again, please participate, 640-3091. If you have an inclination to call and participate in this discussion, we hope you do. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back for this week's edition of the Progress Report, and I'm joined not only by my good friend Mike Farley, as I am most weeks, but also, if you didn't get the first segment, Kurt Smith, who has been a peacenik by his own definition, the use of that word, since the days of protesting the Vietnam War. Came to New Hampshire to work at SNU and continues his activities. Today, he is the board chairman of a rather significant group, a non-governmental group here in New Hampshire called New Hampshire Peace Action. And they are, I think, probably the number one organization concerned about the costs of the war we've been engaging and worried about the wars that might come if they don't keep up their activity. So tell us a little bit about New Hampshire Peace Action. You are the board chair, I believe.
I'm the C3 board chair. The New Hampshire Peace Action actually has two parts to it. C3, it's a 501c3, which means we can advocate issues, but not for candidates. But there's also a C4 board that does advocate for candidates. This is a very broad-based organization that goes a ways back, really arose out of the nuclear freeze movement. And sometime in the 1980s, it started. It was kind of funny for me to attend the early meetings of New Hampshire Peace Action because people had obviously been working with each other for decades, and half the time I didn't know what they were talking about. They alluded to things and events that I had no knowledge of. So this is an organization that goes way back. And
are there chapters in all states?
I think the answer to that is no. For example, there isn't a chapter in Maine. There used to be. The Obama years, for whatever reason, were tough for the peace movement.
Well,
people thought the issue was over.
People thought that he was for peace.
People thought he was for peace, even though it was under Obama that the $1 trillion nuclear modernization program was initially floated.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say I'm on the C3 board, we are really nonpartisan. I mean, I could sit here for quite a while and talk to you about the things that Obama did that I disagree with. So Trump didn't invent the evil. The evil's been out there and is in the system as much under Democrats as under Republicans.
Well, it hurts me to hear that, but
I'm sorry about that, Bob. But it's it's the case.
Well,
I mean,
the truth is the truth, and that's one of the things that we seek here on
Yeah.
the progress report. So
Yes,
we'll have to probe that assertion.
We will have to
little
get
bit.
into that.
we can get
By
it.
the way, folks, Kurt brought this poster, which goes a lot of places with him, which pretty succinctly states the mission of peace action in New Hampshire. New Hampshire says no to war, and there's a phone number and a website. Peace Action does have an office in Concord and an executive
4
director.
Park Street, right next to the State House, very
Yeah.
near the State House. The other side says yes to peace, so we're not just negative. You can pick whether the glass is half full or glass is half empty.
Okay.
And I've carried the sign and yay, these many peace demonstrations,
Yep.
including right outside here on Elm Street, where at least a bunch of us used to gather every Thursday from 12 to 1. So this has seen, yay, many hours of use, this sign.
Yeah. So I wanted to go to the issue I discussed with you when we were chatting, but just before we came here to do the show. And one of the most dramatic things I remember about the whole Cold War is a publication called the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which I used to be pretty regular reader of. And my recollection is that it started by the scientists in the Manhattan Project that built the bomb that we used twice against Japan in August of 1945. Many of whom wanted to see the technology they developed used for more beneficial purposes. Nuclear power was one of their ideas, and there were lots of other cockamamie schemes like using nuclear explosives to build a new Panama Canal and nuclear-powered cruise. I mean, just crazy stuff. Nuclear-powered airplanes. None of this stuff really came to pass. The nuclear power's age is quickly disappearing too. But their major concern was that they had leashed this weapon on Japan, and we could debate whether that was wise or not, but we won't. In the signature of that publication when it came out, was a monthly. Was it a monthly, or biweekly or monthly?
You can easily get it online now, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. But in any event, on every issue, there was a clock on the front cover, and it was called a Doomsday Clock, and the hands were set at a certain time approaching midnight. Midnight was going to be when the bombs went off, and,
Doomsday.
Doomsday. The Earth was devastated. Maybe, advanced civilization was eliminated. All the things that we know, the nuclear winter, we've all heard about the horrors that could be. Because the bombs that destroyed Nagasaki and Hiroshima were little pygmies compared to the arsenal we have now. Way smaller. I mean, we didn't have the super called the hydrogen bomb at that time.
We didn't have the planes to carry them. These things.
We didn't have the
are
planes to
heavy.
carry them. We didn't have the technology to build the supers. And my recollection is that clock has always been somewhere between 10 or maybe 15 minutes before midnight, up to in the Cuban Missile Crisis when it got it to its closest approach ever to Armageddon, which was 2 minutes to midnight shown on the clock. Am I right about that, Kurt?
It sounds right, Bob. I'd have to research it, but it sounds right.
Yeah. And I was shocked. They're still publishing, and the clock is still on there with the hands set close to midnight. And what is the clock at now?
4 minutes.
Now, to me, folks, that's amazing. When we were at the Cold War, we were both, having ever-increasing nuclear arsenals, and both sides, ours and the Soviets, were aiming our missiles at each other. All it would take is a few command orders and buttons pushed, and we would have blown each other's countries to bits and
Not
killed.
to mention, Bob, SALT II. I mean, we've
All
negotiated
of that.
a whole series of treaties
All
to
of that.
cap, limit, and even decrease the nuclear arsenals.
So when they tell me that this well-regarded publication, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, today the clock is set at 4 minutes to midnight, I didn't know that, Kurt. It blows me away. Why is that?
Proliferation.
Well, for one thing, while it's true that the number of nuclear weapons is far less than it was during the heights of the Cold War, there are still 15,000 nuclear weapons left in the world. The vast majority
Today, there's many more
today
countries that have them available.
but the vast majority are in the hands of the United States and Russia. The other countries have really trace numbers. But the other fact to consider, we now know that a nuclear winter could be started with as few as 100 nuclear explosions. So there's far more than enough nuclear weapons to cause a nuclear winter. And for anyone who doesn't know, a nuclear winter means climate change such as to order the growing cycle in a way that would have absolutely catastrophic impacts really on the whole human race. So it wouldn't take a very large percentage of those weapons to go off in order to cause that. That's one factor. The other factor, frankly, is that we have, call him what you will, you've got somebody with, let's say politely, a personality disorder in the White House who keeps making loose statements about destroying North Korea and fire and brimstone. And while we don't know that he would ever do that, we're talking about the fate of the world here.
The failure of the world?
The fate of the world.
Oh, the fate of the world.
The fate of the world. And again, we know this much. While the details are certainly classified, we know that there is a person with the so-called nuclear football who's never far away from the President of the United States. And again, while we don't know the details, they're highly classified, we know that in that football there are codes, there are launch codes for nuclear weapons. And also, and you and I are having this conversation just before the program, I think a lot of your viewers may not realize that the nuclear weapons that the United States does possess are still targeted to Russian targets. They're still on high trigger alerts.
I did not know that. I thought both
that
parties
has
had
not
agreed
been
to
changed.
target them at, whale pods in the ocean or something.
Yeah, no, they're still targeted, and every year there are some fairly serious accidents, some of which could lead to an unintended nuclear explosion. If you've got a small chance of doomsday, no matter how small chance, we were told it was a very small chance that Donald Trump would be elected, weren't we?
Mm-hmm.
He was elected.
Mm-hmm.
We're told that it's a very small chance that the president would become unhinged one night, angry at somebody, and go to the guy with a nuclear football who, while Trump is sleeping in the White House, is right outside in the hall. We know that. We know that person is there. Well, what's going to happen if Trump walks up to that person and says, I want to fire?
And under the law, he has the
Under the
absolute
law, he
unfettered control of that issue.
No one's approval. No one's approval.
No declaration of war
Civilian
from
control
Congress.
of the military, and we can talk about that. Civilian control. I mean, that was done as a safety device, right? The fear that the military would go off on their own. So it's civilian control of the military. By the way, we also know that in the last days of the Nixon administration, when Dick was getting drunk every night, his Secretary of Defense put out the word, if you get any strange orders from the president, don't obey them. That's how worried he was.
Well, could that happen with this president?
You see, the thing is, we don't know for sure.
We don't know if that
sure.
order has gone out.
We don't know what would happen if Trump walked up to the guy and said, I want to fire. We don't know. We can hope that obviously Trump can't fire the missiles himself, and people have to do things in order to fire
That
them.
initiates a chain of
But it
actions.
initiates a chain of action. We also know, and there was a recent hearing, I think, of the Senate Armed Services Committee on whether this should be changed. Various experts came forward and said, don't change it, because if he did that, the order would be illegal, and it's against the law for the U.S. military to obey an illegal order. But on the other hand, we also know that in the military, it tends to be ingrained into people to follow orders. And we're talking about the fate of the world here. If there's any chance that they would obey that order, we ought to make some changes. At the very least, we ought to take these weapons off hair trigger alert, so it's a little harder to fire them. Because we're talking here about a matter of minutes, frankly. And if there's an incoming...
Well, at the height of the Cold War, where and I'm shocked to hear we're still targeting Russia, but when we were both targeting each other, the feeling was that with the flight time for an intercontinental missile with a nuclear warhead is like 20 minutes. You don't have a lot of time to, consult people and do things.
You don't have a lot of time for philosophical reflections, to get people's opinions. That's one reason why the president alone is given the authority to launch, because the idea is he doesn't have a chance to call a cabinet meeting and talk to a whole bunch of experts.
But as
to
you
what he should do.
described, he goes into an attaché case that has launch codes that he,
Yep.
there's not a big red button on his desk and he hits
No,
it
we
and
don't.
off
It's
they
not a
go.
button and the missile goes off. It's not like that. No, somebody has to do
Yeah,
something.
and then that goes to, I presume, someone with at
Secretary
least
of
a gen,
Defense is part of that.
and
the
then
Secretary-
down through general officers and so there are several people who must obey orders, who must recognize the order as an illegal order, and then have the intestinal fortitude to act on that realization. And we're counting on that down the line.
And let's take Richard Nixon and the Saturday Night Massacre. When one person refused to follow the order, he just kept going down the line until he found someone who would do it.
Right. He had to go through the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General before he got to the Solicitor General, the solicitor,
Bork.
Robert Bork. That's right. That's a very dramatic
Who
example.
did not have the intestinal fortitude.
No, no.
So it can happen.
I would just argue that nuclear weapons are inherently evil. We have been very lucky so far that, with the exception of the United States' initial use of them, and let's never forget that, it was the United States that used them in war. The United States is the only country ever to use them
Right.
in war. We cannot forget that.
You know,
We can't count on that good luck continuing.
You know, I certainly agree with that, but you know, you and I share the same church, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Manchester, where, you know, Wag once said to me, you know, the Unitarians, they believe in one God at most. But, you know, if there was one thing that made me believe there's a divine providence looking out for us, it's the fact that we've had these weapons since 1945. We've proliferated them both in terms of more countries and more weapons and more powerful weapons. And with some very close calls, we haven't had a devastating accidental detonation or an intentional in anger detonation.
But the time period we're talking
Yet.
about is a blip in
Yet.
history.
It's a blip in history.
We cannot pat ourselves on the back for that.
No.
You know, John Kennedy once said, and I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't want to use a generic he, either humanity puts an end to war, or war will put an end to humanity. We got to choose.
Yeah.
And I also think we're in the period of history in which that choice will be made.
Oh boy, you're really depressing me, Kurt.
No, no. On the
Well,
other
why-
hand,
why should
on
we
the
be
other hand,
optimistic?
I think there's a decent chance that within a few decades from now, war itself will be illegal. Remember, you and I, again, we're talking about this before the program. At one time, we were told, oh, slavery. It's always been around since ancient times. There's always going to be slaves. And we're told that about war. Now, well, I don't think it's any more true with war than it is with slavery.
Well, there's still some vestigial slavery in places around the globe.
Yeah,
Now,
vestigial.
there's
Yeah.
human trafficking right here in these good
There's
old
true
United
good
States.
trafficking, but still,
Yeah.
you'll have to grant my point. Slavery as a whole
As
is
an
recognized
institution.
universally by society as something you don't do. It's
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah,
We do,
that's right.
and war. You might say, well, isn't war already illegal? Well, under the law of nations, it is still reserved as a final conflict resolver, apparently. But
So-
what do you? We're coming up on our next break, but we talk about war. The concept of what a war is has changed. I think probably the last real war we had might have been World War II. And then we had the undeclared Korean conflict, and then whatever Vietnam was. And now we're fighting battles with enemies all around the world under an
wars. You mean
ongoing
Perpetua. We're in.
Perpetual war.
resolution to two prior
when
presidents.
when did Afghanistan start, and when is it going to end?
So
No one can tell me.
I ask, what is your take on this as someone who's thought about these things? As much as we're working toward an end to war, war is evolving, and is the goalpost moving? I guess is my question.
I think the goalpost is moving. I mean, there are good signs that rapid social change is occurring. An example would be same-sex marriage, which was unthinkable 10 years ago. Now, boom,
True.
we got it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was absolutely unthinkable. I mean, President Obama started his political career, being opposed to same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
And he came around on that. This shows that dramatic social change can happen more quickly than anyone thinks. So no, I'm not a pessimist. I actually think that we are, in a sense, fortunate that we are in a critical point in human history that will determine whether war is going to continue or not.
Well, we're coming up to our break,
Sort
but
of.
when we come back, I want to talk about how that translates. Yes, your example of same-sex marriage here in the United States is one thing, but can we apply the same expectations to third world countries, to places like Syria and Iran, which for different reasons are just under completely different circumstances?
We still got a call. We'll delay our break
No,
if we got a call.
Looks like it's gone.
Okay, caller, if we missed you, please call back after our break. We'll be back real soon. We'd love to hear from you. And others, 640-3091. We'll be back with our final segment with our guest, Kurt Smith, chairman of the board of one of the peace action organizations that we have here in New Hampshire doing very valuable work. We'll
The
be right back.
nonpartisan part.
Nonpartisan. Hi, folks. This is the final segment, our third segment, as it is every week, with the progress report. I'm here with Mike Farley, as I am most weeks, and we are having a really interesting discussion with Kurt Smith, who's introduced himself, and is one of his major activities in life is being a peacenik, an activist for peace. And he does that, among other things, by being one of the board chairs of the New Hampshire Peace Action of the C4 organization, right?
C3.
C3. And he's very well informed and very concerned, but also apparently quite optimistic that we may escape the dreadful horrors of an Armageddon, of a nuclear weapon fired in anger. And these days we have so many of them, and they're so much more powerful than the little bombs and relative pipsqueaks that we dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in August 1945.
Think about that.
Did you had something you wanted to go to, and I do too. But
Well,
I'll
I
let
just
you go.
as we went to break, we were talking about the idea of kind of outlawing war, and I had kind of brought up the concept that war is kind of changing. It's not declared nation state against nation state so much anymore. There are a lot of conflicts in the world that we are military involved in, where even the definition of the objectives is fuzzy and hard to determine. And I guess I would extend that a little bit to armed conflicts that may in some ways be righteous, uprisings of the people to gain control of their government, that kind of thing. And I just wanted to just have you kind of philosophically talk about your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Quickly,
I would not be able to call myself a complete pacifist. For example, what you mentioned, wars of national liberation, where a country is trying to free itself. I even supported the Vietnamese communists against the United States. I was opposed to the Vietnam War, but I thought that what the Vietnamese were doing, rebelling against us, was just. I still think that. I think it was just.
You think our War of Independence itself was just?
Yes, it is. It was just at the time. Yes.
I think that's a pretty good example. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, but to look at the big picture, Well, let's go back to Martin Luther King. In his Riverside Church speech, he said, "The United States is the largest purveyor of violence in the world today." That's even more true than when he spoke it. The United States spends more for defense than the next 10 nations combined.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Show
And
us.
I've got a chart that
You
talks
got
about
your pie chart that tells the
that
story.
talks about.
You got to
it
hold
talks-
it up.
Well,
whatever. I'll tell you the main point of it. This is a chart from the National Priorities Project, which points out that U.S. spending on the military in 2015 was nearly $600 billion, which is 54% of the discretionary spending of the United States. We keep hearing we've got to cut Social Security, we got to we don't have money.
But they say we've got to increase
but there's
our
plenty
defense
of money for the military, and it's never questioned.
In fact,
Huh?
the political climate today with the folks that are running Congress and the White House, they want more.
I want more. It's not enough. They thought
enough.
Obama made the military too weak.
There used to be a wonderful phrase for that when they were talking about we have to keep expanding our nuclear stockpile. How high do you want to make the rubble bounce?
Well, again, they're talking about so-called modernization to the tune of 1.2 trillion.
Yeah.
The United States has troops in 147 countries, folks. Let that sink in. It's to the extent that you can suddenly have several American troops killed in a place in Africa, and no one even like Lindsey Graham didn't even know they were there.
That was Niger.
That's a different situation. But do we truly have? I don't want to use the term combat troops, but force troops in all of these countries, or are these troops who are guarding embassies and that kind of thing?
I don't know if we know. I think in a place
That's a
like
good-
Somalia, we're
answer.
pretty close to having a regular war.
Yeah.
Are typically what the U.S. likes to do now is special ops and drone warfare, because for one thing, these wars are not now being challenged in a broad way by the American people.
Yeah.
Anyway, my main point is that the United States, King was right, is the largest purveyor of violence in the war today.
Yeah.
To end war means to basically dismantle the United States empire, which is what exists today.
You know, that is so striking because our founding fathers were so wary of a permanent military
That's
establishment.
what we've got now.
I mean, it goes from George Washington, who certainly knew something about it, to President Dwight Eisenhower decried the military-industrial complex. And we did not want to have a huge military establishment in the founding of this country. And, of course, times have changed, but that's what we got. But I wanted to ask you this, Kurt. You've talked about, and I think you're not in favor of it, this massive investment in, upgrading our nuclear arsenal, our nuclear triad, which is the submarines, the intercontinental missiles, and the bombers. But don't we need to keep the damn thing up to date? Isn't there a danger of these weapons becoming even more dangerous because of obsolescence and lack of maintenance?
Well, that's the argument. The main thing we need to do is get rid of it. And if you're investing in 1.2 trillion in something, that makes it harder for you to get rid of it. We should be negotiating with the other nuclear powers an end to nuclear weapons. And again, getting back to being positive, there was a resolution passed in the United Nations last July to basically end nuclear war. The United States didn't sign it. None of the nuclear powers did. But those who did endorse it evidently didn't think it was in their interest to have any nuclear powers in the world. And the peace organization that formulated that resolution won the Nobel Peace Prize this last time around. And I've got a copy of their speech, which is very moving, in Stockholm. Basically, they said, well, we're told that we're not realistic, but the only rational thing is to get rid of nuclear weapons. We either get rid of them or they're going to get rid of us, sooner or later.
Yeah.
Now, recognizing and agreeing with everything in that wonderful statement, and I don't want to say that it's not realistic. I understand that the most realistic thing in the world, if you want to preserve what we're doing here, is we need to get our hands around this problem and fix it. But this is kind of a situation. Who goes first? How what are the first steps to be taken besides having an organization like yours and raising the awareness and raising your voices on a political level? When we were just talking about these are aimed at each other. Does it make a lot of sense, say, unilaterally to disarm? We've actually tried that.
I think what we have to accept, and I know it's hard for us as Americans to accept, is that we are the main problem. We keep hearing about American exceptionalism.
Acknowledging that, and I'm
We
willing
are
to
the main
I'm willing
problem.
to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, there's also the idea of self-preservation, and we do have enemies out there. And the particular enemy that's actually aiming this large nuclear arsenal against us has risen in prominence as an enemy against us. We're in a tough spot right now, and if we wanted to do what you're advocating, and which I join you in, what's the first step?
Negotiate. Step up and say we're going to negotiate. Under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, in fact, the country non-nuclear powers agreed to that treaty only with the proviso, which is in, was it Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation, that requires the nuclear powers to negotiate the end of nuclear weapons. That's what we have to force or pressure our government to stand for. There's no harm in negotiation. In fact, without negotiation, we're not going to get rid of nuclear weapons.
Right.
Or prevent them from
Or
showing up in
prevent them
places like Korea.
from another North Korea and who knows how many others down the line.
Yeah.
And the more that happens, the more dangerous obviously the world gets.
You know, I've often wondered how other countries feel when we tell them, no, you shouldn't have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have nuclear
We're the
weapons.
ones who use
But
them.
we can have all we
We
want.
can have them, and we are the
can
only
spend
country
$1
to
trillion
use them.
to get more and update
Yeah.
them. But you can't have them.
Yeah.
And what gives us the right to dictate that to the rest of the world?
That's exactly
Because
right.
we have nuclear weapons.
We don't have much credibility if we're spending 1.2 trillion to quote unquote modernize, which by the way includes a whole new class of cruise missiles.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just modernization; it's also new weapon systems that don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
The cruise missile that is part of it, this $1.2 trillion package, violates the intermediate range treaty that we negotiated with the Russians.
Which is part of our law, so we're violating
Which is part,
our
we're
own
violating our
Yeah,
own law.
yeah. So, New Hampshire peace action. I mean, this sounds like such a huge, overwhelming issue. How does New Hampshire peace action propose to help us to get to this result?
I'm doing part of it here
Okay.
by coming here and talking. We do demonstrations. Whenever we can speak in front of organizations like Rotary or churches, we do that. I'm teaching a course, an OLLI course on nuclear weapons and nuclear war in the spring, getting the word out, trying to change the paradigm. Because the paradigm now is the American exceptionalism, that we're a wonderful nation and that it's good that we are conducting wars around the world and that we're spending 54% of our discretionary money on the military, that's a good thing. We've got to change that paradigm. We've got to get Americans to realize that this is a problem and they ought to protest it to their government. And
You know, you mentioned that peace action arises out of the nuclear freeze movement
Yeah.
quite some time ago, and I certainly do remember that. Some great people involved in that.
some of them are still around.
Some of them are still around. There were some great people.
Then Seabrook, and I know you remember that as well.
Oh, yeah. The idea that there's a peaceful atom is cockamamie, and we know that. In fact, in other countries, they've used their so-called peaceful atom as a cover for developing nuclear explosions. India is one example that did that. But, you know, given the fact that these folks like you, high-principled, motivated, active people have been at this for so long, and yet the predominant political agenda seems to be, particularly since the last election, the answer is not to do away, but to get more and do more and do more.
It can
Why,
be
why is that? Why is that? Why is not this message
Oh.
resonating, since it seems to make so much sense?
Well, Eisenhower said it. You know, the military-industrial complex, it's profitable.
Yeah.
War industry, the war industry is extremely profitable. Gigantic corporations are making who knows how much of it.
And a whole new industry of
Yeah.
private armies and contractors to the U.S. military to perform military duty. That's a whole new industry that's arisen. Millionaires have been made from that industry.
Does anybody
so
have
on.
any idea? I mean, this is probably wild, but does anybody have an idea how long we've got? How long can our luck hold? I mean, with climate change, we know that's a possible devastating thing, but people have some estimate. We've got so much time left to change our policies in a major way. You got any ideas? It's just total.
I can only
there's
tell
no
you-
database to.
I can only tell you that I turn on the New York Times and the cell phone every day to make sure the world is still here. Because even though I'm optimistic, I recognize that we are in a period of extremely great danger
Yeah.
with this president, but frankly, even before this president came along.
Are there any political office holders that you look up to that are with you on this thesis? I'm sure there must be some at the state level, but at the national level, is there?
I would say
Anybody?
Bernie Sanders, although I don't think he speaks out forcefully enough about the military-industrial complex. No, I mean basically, the military-industrial complex is so powerful that you look at the way our senators and representatives vote. They're all beholden in one way or another to the money of the military
donor class.
complex. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Maybe what Peace Action should be doing, adding to their agenda, maybe they should be running people for public office. Are you doing that?
we're not, but a group that I'm really optimistic about, and I know you know about it too, the Democratic Socialists of America. They're running candidates, and definitely they have an analysis that I would agree with, that basically it's the system, the capitalist system, the way that it's now set up, that will have to be changed. The situation is now so extreme. This comes back to optimism again, though. The situation is so extreme that it will have to be changed. It can't go on, if only, and you allude to global warming. Global warming can't go on as it is. The system that produced that is going to have to change. And ultimately, that's the same system. That's the military-industrial complex. Again, getting back
Wow.
to Dr. King, to him it was a syndrome. Racism, militarism, environmental degradation, these were symptoms of an underlying problem, of the same one.
Kurt, we're just about done,
Okay.
but I want to give you a quick chance to tell people how they can help out if they want to, and to thank you for coming down and talking to us.
I'm very grateful to do that. Basically, go to the New Hampshire Peace Action website. You'll find there a way to donate, or give our office a call, or show up to one of our events. Basically, the organization is 501c3 and C4, and we depend on an existence for donations. If you don't feel like donating to us, donate to the National Peace Action website, which also is very deserving. Basically, get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Margaret Mead famously said, don't be afraid of a small group changing the world. That's the only way it's ever
Only way it
happened.
has ever happened.
Something like that, I'd
Somewhere.
paraphrase. Yeah.
Well, nothing like civic involvement and people working together for the same thing. I mean, that
Yeah.
always gets more done.
Yeah. I thought close. There it is. I thought we had another
done.
quick minute here. I just want to again thank Kurt for coming down, and Brian for serving us as he
Okay.
does so often. And next week we'll be back with another edition of the Progress Report. And the week after that we will have Chris Pappas.
Chris Pappas,
Chris Pappas.
Chris Pappas,
for
candidate
CD1.
for the CD1 district. He will be with us. So look forward to that, folks, and thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show. Have a good evening, everybody.